Hello, everyone. We are going to be reading Sophist today by Plato. Um, I am Silly Sod. Thank you for joining me. Subscribe. Here we go. This is the intro. The day following their conversation in Theaetetus, Geometer Theodorus, together with his Athenian pupils Theaetetus and Socrates' young namesake, rejoined Socrates for further discussion. They bring with them a philosopher visiting from Elea, a Greek town of southern Italy famous as home to the great philosopher Parmenides and his pupil, the logician Zeno, both of whom Socrates had encountered in yet another dialogue closely linked to this one. Parmenides. Socrates asked whether this visitor and the others at Elea treat the philosopher, the statesman, and the sophist as actually being just one thing, a single sort of person, though appearing to different people as falling under just one or another of these headings, or rather as having three distinct intellectual capacities, as their three names indicate. Hearing that the latter is the Eleatic's view, he thus initiates two successive complex discussions. First, in Sophist, the visitor, opting to use Socrates' favorite procedure of question and answer, displays in full detail his own conception of the sophist. In Statesman, he then continues in a similar way with the statesman. There is no third discussion of the philosopher, despite occasional suggestions that the initial agenda calls for one. The visitor, after all, is a distinguished philosopher. Perhaps Plato's intention is to mark the philosopher off for us from these other two through showing a supreme philosopher at work, defining them and therein demonstrating his own devotion to truth, and the correct method of analysis for achieving it. For Plato, these together define the philosopher. In defining the sophist, the visitor employs the method of division, or more accurately, of collection and division, described in Phaedrus, and early on in Philebus. This also underlies the latter's discussion of the varieties of pleasure and knowledge. He first offers 6 distinct routes for understanding the sophist, by systematically demarcating specific classes within successively smaller, nested, more inclusive classes of practitioners. These specific subclasses are then identified as the sophists. Apparently, sophistry is a somewhat loosely associated set of distinct capacities. It hunts rich, prominent young men so as to receive a wage for speaking persuasively to them about virtues. It sells, in different circumstances, items of alleged knowledge on the same subject. It is expert at winning private debates about right and wrong. It cleanses people's souls by refuting their false or poorly supported ideas. Yet in a final accounting, whose long-delayed completion is reached only at the very end of the dialogue. Sophist is penned in as one who, though aware that he does not know anything, produces in words totally inadequate copies of the truth on important subjects. Ones he makes appear to others to be the truth. Even though being false, they are hardly even like it. The relation of this final definition to the 6 first ones is not fully explored. The visitor may be intimating the general principle that sometimes a nature or real kind has no single place in a systematic division. It unifies a set of differently located functions, each with its own differences from its more immediate intellectual neighbors. In any case, the essential idea of the method of collection and division is that each thing is to be understood through a full, lively awareness of its similarities and differences in relation to other things, the sort of awareness that the varied divisions encourage us to reach. Much other general instruction on how to make proper use of the method is given in Statesman. The visitor delays completing his final accounting because he sees the need first to show how it is even possible for anyone to do what he wants to say. The sophist does do. Speak words that appear to be true but in fact are false. The trouble is that he understands speaking falsely as saying what is not, while his teacher Parmenides famously maintained that it is impossible, so he is required to engage in parricide, showing how Parmenides was wrong. There ensues an elaborate discussion of the meaning of what is as well as of what is not, in which we can see Plato working out a new theory of the nature of the form of being, and its relations to other greatest or most comprehensive forms. Such a theory is needed to make saying what is not, speaking falsely, intelligible after all. Much of the interest of the dialogue has always been found in this metaphysical excursion into the topic of being and not being in general. So we begin. Theodorus, we've come at the proper time by yesterday's agreement, Socrates. We're also bringing this man who's visiting us. He's from Elea, and he's a member of the group who gather around Parmenides and Zeno, and he's very much a philosopher. Socrates, are you bringing a visitor, Theodorus, or are you bringing a god without realizing it instead, like the ones Homer mentions? He says gods accompany people who are respectful and just. He also says the god of his, who's at least as much a god as any other, the companion who keeps an eye on people's actions, both the criminal and the lawful ones. So your visitor might be a great power following along with you. Sort of god of refutation to keep watch on us and show how bad we are at speaking, and to refute us. Theodorus, that's not our visitor's style, Socrates. He's more moderate than the enthusiasts for debating are, and he doesn't seem to me to be a god at all. He is divine, but then I call all philosophers that. That's the right thing for you to do, my friend. But probably it's no easier, I imagine, to distinguish that kind of person than it is to distinguish gods. Certainly, the genuine philosophers who hunt our cities, by contrast to the fake ones, take on all sorts of different appearances just because of other people's ignorance. As philosophers look down from above at the lives of those below them, some people think they're worthless, and others think they're worth everything in the world. Sometimes I take on the appearance of statesmen, and sometimes of sophists. Sometimes, too, they might give the impression that they're completely insane. But if it's all right with our visitor, I'd be glad to have him tell us what the people where he comes from used to apply the following names to, and what they thought about these things. What things? Socrates, sophist, statesman, and philosopher. Theodorus, what, or what kind of thing especially makes you consider asking that question? What special problem about them do you have in mind? Socrates, this. Did they think that sophists, statesmen, and philosophers make up one kind of thing or two? Or did they divide them up into three kinds corresponding to the three names and attach one name to each of them? I don't think it would offend him to tell us about it. Would it, sir? Visitor. No, Theodorus, it wouldn't offend me. I don't have any objection. And the answer is easy. They think there are three kinds, distinguishing clearly what each of them is, though it isn't a small or easy job. Doris, luckily, Socrates, you've gotten hold of words that are very much like the ones we happen to be asking him about, and he made the same excuse to us that he made to you just now, since he's heard a lot about the issue, after all, and hasn't forgotten it. Socrates, in that case, sir, don't refuse our very first request. Tell us this. When you want to explain something to somebody, do you usually prefer to explain it by yourself in a long speech, or to do it with questions? That's the way Parmenides did it one time, when he was very old and I was young. He used questions to generate a very fine discussion. Gods go from town to town disguised as visitors of varied appearance, just like Odysseus on this occasion, to observe the deeds of unjust people. The reference... Oh. Visitor. It's easier to do it the second way, Socrates. You're talking with someone who's easy to handle and isn't a troublemaker. Otherwise, it's easier to do it alone, Socrates. You can pick anyone here you want. They'll all answer you politely. If you take my advice, you'll choose one of the young ones, Theaetetus here, or for that matter, any of the others you... Visitor. As long as I'm here with you for the first time, Socrates, I'd be embarrassed not to make our meeting a conversational give and take, but instead to stretch things out and give a long, continuous speech by myself or even to someone else, as if I were delivering an oration. A person wouldn't expect the issue you just mentioned to be as small as your question suggests. In fact, it needs a very long discussion. On the other hand, it certainly seems rude and uncivilized for our visitor not to oblige you and these people here, especially when you spoke in the way you have. So I'll accept Theaetetus as the person to talk with on the basis of your urging, and because I've talked with him myself before. Theaetetus, then please do that, sir, and you'll be doing us all a favor, just as Socrates said. Visitor. We probably don't need to say anything more about that then, Theaetetus. From now on, you're the one I should have the rest of our talk with, but if you're annoyed at how long the job takes, you should blame your friends here instead of me. Theaetetus, I don't think I'll give out now, but if anything like that does happen, we'll have to use this other Socrates over here as a substitute. He's Socrates' namesake, but he's my age and exercises with me, and he's used to sharing lots of tasks with me. Visitor, good. As the talk goes along, you'll think about that on your own, but with me, I think you need to begin the investigation from the Sophist by searching for him and giving a clear account on what he is. Now, in this case, you and I only have the name in common, and maybe we've each used it for a different thing. In every case, though, we always need to be in agreement about the thing itself by means of a verbal explanation, rather than doing without any such explanation, and merely agreeing about the name. But it isn't the easiest thing in the world to grasp the tribe we're planning to search for, I mean the Sophist, or say what it is. But if an important issue needs to be worked out well, then as everyone has long thought, you need to practice on unimportant, easier issues first. So that's my advice to us now, Theaetetus. Since we think it's hard to hunt down and deal with the kind Sophist, we ought to practice our method of hunting on something easier first, unless you can tell us about another way that's somehow more promising. Theaetetus, I can't. Visitor, do you want us to focus on something trivial and try to use it as a model for the more important issue? Theaetetus, yes. Visitor, what might we propose that's unimportant and easy to understand, but can have an account given of it just as much as more important things can? For example, an angler. Isn't that recognizable to everybody, but not worth being too serious about? Yes. Visitor, that, I expect, will provide an appropriate method of hunting, and a way of talking for what we want. Theaetetus, that would be fine. Visitor, well then, let's go after the angler from this starting point. Tell me, shall we take him to be an expert at something, or a non-expert with another sort of capacity? He's definitely not a non-expert. But expertise as a whole falls pretty much into two types. Theaetetus, how? There's farming, of any sort of caring for any mortal body, and there's also caring for things that are put together or fabricated, which we call equipment, and there's imitation. The right thing would be to call all those things by a single name. Theaetetus, how? What name? Visitor, when you bring anything into being that wasn't in being before, we say you're a producer, and that the thing you've brought into being is produced. That's right. And all the things we went through just now have their own capacity for that. Yes. Let's put them under the heading of production. All right. Visitor, next consider the whole type that has to do with learning, recognition, commerce, combat, and hunting. None of these creates anything. They take things that are or have come into being, and they take possession of some of them with words and actions, and they keep other things from being taken possession of. For that reason, it would be appropriate to call all the parts of this type acquisition. Theaetetus, yes, that would be appropriate. Visitor, if every expertise falls under acquisition or production, Theaetetus, which one shall we put angling in? Acquisition, obviously. Aren't there two types of expertise in acquisition? One type mutually willing exchange, through gifts and wages and purchase? And would the other type, which brings things into one's possessions by actions or words, be expertise in taking possession? Theaetetus, it seems so anyway, given what we've said. Well then, shouldn't we cut possession-taking in two? How? The part that's done openly we label combat, and the part that's secret we call hunting. Theaetetus, yes. Visitor, and furthermore, it would be unreasonable not to cut hunting in two. How? Visitor, we divide it into the hunting of living things and the hunting of lifeless things. Yes, if there are both kinds. How could there not be? But we should let the part involving lifeless things go. It doesn't have a name, except for some kinds of diving and other trivial things like that. The other part, namely the hunting of living animals, we shall call animal hunting. All right. Visitor, and isn't it right to say that that animal hunting has two types? One is land hunting, the hunting of things with feet, which is divided into many types with many names. The other is aquatic hunting, which hunts animals that swim. Theaetetus, of course. And things that swim, we see, fall into things with wings and things living underwater. Of course. And all hunting of things that have wings, I suppose, is called bird catching. Yes. And all hunting of underwater things is fishing. Yes. Well then, this kind of hunting might be divided into two main parts. What are they? Visitor. One of them does its hunting with stationary nets, and the other one does it by striking. What do you mean? How are you dividing them? Visitor. The first one is whatever involves surrounding something and enclosing it, to prevent it from escaping, so it's reasonable to call it enclosure. Of course. Visitor. Shouldn't baskets, nets, slipknots, creels, and so forth be called enclosures? Yes. So we'll call this part of hunting enclosure, hunting or something like that. Theaetetus, yes. Visitor, but the kind that's done by striking with hooks or three-pronged spears is different. We should call it by one word, strike hunting. Or what term would be better? Theaetetus, let's not worry about the name. That one will do. Then there's a part of striking that done at night by firelight, as it happens, is called torch hunting by the people who do it. Of course. But the whole daytime part is called hooking, since even the three-pronged spears have hooks on their points. Theaetetus, yes, that's what it's called. Visitor, then one part of the hooking part of striking is done by striking, downward from above. And since you usually use a three-pronged spear that way, I think it's called spearing. Theaetetus, some people do call it that. And I suppose there's only one type left. What? It's the type of striking, contrary to the previous one. It's done with a hook, not just to any part of the fish's body, but always to the prey's head and mouth, and pulls it upward from below with rods or reeds. What are we going to say its name should be? I think we've now found what we've said. Find. Visitor. So now we're in agreement about the angler's expertise, not just as to its name. In addition, we've also sufficiently grasped a verbal explanation concerning the thing itself. Within expertise as a whole, one half was acquisitive. Half of the acquisitive was taking possession. Half of possession taking was hunting. Half of hunting was animal hunting. Half of animal hunting was aquatic hunting. All of the lower portion of aquatic hunting was fishing. Half of fishing was hunting by striking, and half of striking was hooking. And the part of hooking that involves a blow drawing a thing upward from underneath is called by a name that's derived by its similarity to the action itself. That is, it's called draw fishing or angling, which is what we're searching for. Theaetetus, we've got a completely adequate demonstration of that anyway. Well then, let's use that model to try and find the sophist and see what he is. Theaetetus, fine. First question then was whether we should suppose the angler is a non-expert or that he's an expert at something. Yes. Well, shall we suppose the sophist is a layman or completely and truly an expert? He's not a layman at all. I understand what you're saying. He has to be the kind of person that the name sophist indicates. Visitor, so it seems we need to take him to have a kind of expertise. But what is it? Visitor, for heaven's sake, don't we recognize that the one man belongs to the same kind as the other? Theaetetus, which man? Visitor, the angler and the sophist. In what way? To me they both clearly appear to be hunters. We said which kind of hunting the angler does. What kind does the sophist do? Visitor, we've divided all hunting into two parts, one for land animals and one for swimming animals. Theaetetus, yes. We went through one part about the animals that swim underwater, but we left the land part undivided, though we noted that it contains many types. Of course. Up till that point, the sophist and the angler go the same way, beginning from expertise and acquisition. Same two, anyway. Starting from animal hunting, though, they turn away from each other. One goes to ponds, rivers, and the sea, and hunts for the animals there. Of course. The other one goes to the land and to different kinds of rivers, which are like plentiful meadows of wealthy youths, to take possession of the things living there. Theaetetus, what do you mean? There are two main kinds of things to hunt on land. What are they? Tame things and wild ones. Is there any such thing as hunting tame animals? Visitor, there is if human beings are tame animals at any rate. Make whichever assumption you like. Either there are no tame animals, or there are tame animals but humans are wild, or else you'll say humans are tame but aren't hunted. Specify whichever you prefer to say. Theaetetus, I think we're tame animals, and I'll say that humans are in fact hunted. The word sophist is etymologically related to the word wise, sophos, and so can be taken to connote knowledge and expertise. Good side. Visitor, then let's say that the hunting of tame animals falls into two parts. Theaetetus, how? Visitor, let's take piracy, enslavement, tyranny, along with everything that has to do with war, and let's define them all together as hunting by force. Theaetetus, fine. Visitor, it will also take legal oratory, political oratory, and conversation all together in one whole, and call them all one single sort of expertise in persuasion. Theaetetus, right. Visitor, let's say that there are two kinds of persuasion. What are they? One is done privately, and the other is done in public. Yes, each of those is one type. Visitor, and doesn't one part of private hunting earn wages, while the other part gives gifts? Theaetetus, I don't understand. Visitor, it seems you aren't paying attention to the way lovers hunt. In what connection? The fact that when they hunt people, they give presents to them too. Theaetetus, very true. Visitor, let's call this type of expertise in love. All right. One part of the wage-earning type approaches people by being agreeable, uses only pleasure as its bait, and earns only its own room and board. I think we'd all call it flattery, or expertise in pleasing people. Theaetetus, of course. Visitor, but doesn't the kind of wage earning that actually earns money, though it claims to deal with people for the sake of virtue, deserve to be called by a different name? Theaetetus, of course. Visitor, what name? Try and tell me. Theaetetus, it's obvious. I think we found the sophist. I think that's the name that would be suitable for him. Visitor, so according to our account now, Theaetetus, it seems that this sort of expertise belongs to appropriation, taking possession, hunting, animal hunting, hunting on land, human hunting, hunting by persuasion, hunting privately, and money earning. It's the hunting of rich, prominent young men, and according to the way our account has turned out, it's what should be called the expertise of this sophist. Theaetetus, absolutely. Visitor, still, let's look at it this way too, since what we're looking for isn't a trivial sort of expertise, but quite a diverse one. And even in what we've just said earlier, it actually presents the appearance of being not what we're now saying, but a different type. Theaetetus, how? Visitor, expertise in acquisition has two parts, hunting and exchanging. Theaetetus, yes. Visitor, and let's say there are two types of exchanging, giving and selling. All right. And we're also going to say that selling divides in two. How? Visitor, one part is the sale of things that the seller himself makes. The other is purveying, that is, the purveying of things other people make. Theaetetus, of course. Visitor, then what? Isn't the part of purveying that's done within the city, about half of it, called retailing? Yes. Visitor, and isn't wholesaling the part that buys and sells things for exchange between one city and another? Theaetetus, of course. And can't we see that one part of wholesaling sells things for the nourishment and use of the body in exchange for cash, and the other sells things for the soul? Theaetetus, what do you mean by that? Visitor, maybe we don't understand the one for the soul, since certainly we understand the other kind. Theaetetus, yes. Visitor, let's consider every kind of music that's carried from one city to another and brought here and sold here, as well as painting and shows and other things for the soul. Some of them are transported and sold for amusement and others for serious purposes. We can use the word wholesaler for the transporter and seller of these things just as well as for someone who sells food and beverages. Theaetetus, that's absolutely true. Visitor, wouldn't you use the same name for somebody who bought and exchanged items of knowledge for money from city to city? Theaetetus. Definitely. Visitor. Wouldn't the right thing to say be that the art of display is one part of that soul wholesaling? And don't we have to call the other part of it, the part that consists in selling knowledge, by a name that's similar and also equally ridiculous? Theaetetus. Definitely. Visitor. And one name should be used for the part of this knowledge. And one name should be used for the part of this knowledge selling that deals with knowledge of virtue, and another name for the part that deals with knowledge of other things? Theaetetus, of course. Visitor. Expert selling would fit the second. You try and tell me the name of the first one. Theaetetus. What other name could you mention that would fit, except for the kind, sophist, which we're looking for now, right now? Visitor. I couldn't mention any other one. Come now, and let's collect it all together. We'll say that the expertise of the part of acquisition, exchange, selling, wholesaling, soul wholesaling, dealing in words and learning that have to do with virtue. That's sophistry in its second appearance. Theaetetus. Definitely. Visitor. In the third place, I think you'd call somebody just the same thing if he settled here in the city and undertook to make his living selling those same things, both ones that he'd bought and ones that he'd made himself. Theaetetus. Yes, I would. Visitor. So apparently you'll still say that sophistry falls under acquisition, exchange, and selling, either by retailing things that others make or by selling things that he makes himself. It's the retail sale of any learning that has to do with the sorts of things we mentioned. Theaetetus. It has to be, since we need to stay consistent with what we said before. Visitor. Now let's see whether the type we're chasing is something like the following. Theaetetus. What? Visitor. Combat was one part of acquisition. Theaetetus. Yes. Visitor. And it makes sense to divide it in two. Theaetetus. How? Visitor. We'll take one part to be competition and the other to be fighting. Theaetetus. Yes. Visitor. And it would be fitting and proper to give a name like violence to the part of fighting in which one body fights another against another. Theaetetus. Yes. Visitor. And as for the part that pits words against words, what else would you call it other than controversy? Theaetetus. Nothing else. Visitor. But we have to have two types of controversy. Theaetetus. In what way? Visitor. So far as it involves one long public speech directed against another and deals with justice and injustice. Forensic. Theaetetus. Yes. Visitor. But if it goes on in private discussions and is chopped up into questions and answers, don't we usually call it disputation? Theaetetus. Yes. Visitor. One part of disputation involves controversy about contracts and isn't carried on in any systematic or expert way. We should take that to be a type of disputation, since we can express what makes it different, but it hasn't been given a name before and it doesn't deserve to get one from us. Theaetetus. That's true. Its subtypes are too small and varied. Visitor. But what about disputation that's done expertly and involves controversy about general issues, including what's just and what's unjust? Don't we normally call that debating? Theaetetus. Of course. Visitor. Part of debating, it turns out, wastes money, and the other part makes money. Theaetetus. Absolutely. Visitor. Let's try and say what each of them ought to be called. Theaetetus. We have to. Visitor. I think one type of debating is a result of the pleasure a person gets from the activity and involves neglecting his own livelihood. But its style is unpleasant to most people who hear it, and in my view, it's right to call it chatter. Theaetetus. That's pretty much what people do call it. Visitor. You take a turn now. Say what its contrary is, which makes money from debates between individuals. Theaetetus. How could anyone go wrong in saying that the amazing sophist we've been after has turned up once again for the fourth time? Visitor. It seems his type is precisely the money-making branch of expertise in debating, disputation, controversy, fighting, combat, and acquisition. According to what our account shows us now, that's the sophist. Theaetetus. Absolutely. Visitor. So you see how true it is that the beast is complex and can't be caught with one hand, as they say. Theaetetus. It does take both hands. Visitor. Yes, and you need all your capacity to follow his tracks in what's to come. Tell me, don't we call some things by names that house servants use? Theaetetus, a lot of things. But what are you asking about? Visitor, for example, things like filtering, straining, winnowing. Theaetetus, of course. Visitor, and also we know about carding, spitting, weaving, and a million other things like that which are involved in experts' crafts. Is that right? Theaetetus, what general point are you trying to make with these examples? Visitor, all the things I've mentioned are kinds of dividing. Theaetetus, yes. Visitor, since there's a single kind of expertise involved in all of them, then according to what I've said, we'll expect it to have a single name. Theaetetus, what shall we call it? Visitor, discrimination. Theaetetus, all right. Visitor, think about whether we can see two types in it. Theaetetus, you're asking me to do some quick thinking. Visitor, in fact, in what we've called discriminations, one kind separates what's worse from what's better, and the other separates like from like. Theaetetus, that's obvious now that you've said it. Visitor, I don't have an ordinary name for one of them, but I do have a name for the kind of discrimination that leaves what's better and throws away what's worse. Theaetetus, what? Tell me. Visitor, I think everyone says that kind of discrimination is cleansing. Theaetetus, yes. Visitor, won't everyone see that cleansing has two types? Theaetetus, yes, maybe, if they had time, but I don't see now. Visitor, many kinds of cleaning that have to do with the body can appropriately be included under a simple name. Theaetetus, which ones? What name? Visitor, there's the cleansing of the inside part of living bodies, which is done by gymnastics and medicine. And there's the cleansing of the insignificant outside part that's done by bathing. And also there's the cleansing of non-living bodies, which foaling and all kinds of furbishing take care of, and which have lots of specialized and ridiculous-seeming names. Theaetetus, very ridiculous. Visitor, of course, Theaetetus. But our method of dealing with words doesn't care one way or the other whether cleansing by sponging or by taking medicine does a lot of good or only a little. The method aims at acquiring intelligence, so it tries to understand how all kinds of experience belong to the same kind or not. And so for that it values them all equally without thinking that some of them are more ridiculous than others, as far as their similarity is concerned. And it doesn't consider a person more impressive because he exemplifies hunting by military expertise rather than by picking lice. Instead, it usually considers him more vapid. Moreover, you just asked about what name we call all the capacities that are assigned to living or non-living bodies. As far as that's concerned, it doesn't matter to our method which name would seem to be the most appropriate, just so long as it keeps the cleansing of the soul separate from the cleansing of everything else. For the time being, the method has only tried to distinguish the cleansing that concerns thinking from the other kinds. If that is what is, we understand what its aim is. Theaetetus, I do understand, and I agree that there are two types of cleansing, one dealing with the soul, and a separate one dealing with the body. Visitor, fine. Next, listen and try to cut the one we've mentioned it to. Theaetetus, I'll try to follow your lead and cut it however you say. Visitor, do we say that wickedness in the soul is something different from virtue? Theaetetus, of course. Visitor, and to cleanse something was to leave what's good and throw out what's inferior? Theaetetus, yes. Visitor, so insofar as we can find some way to remove what's bad in the soul, it will be suitable to call it cleansing. Theaetetus, of course. Visitor, we have to say that there are two kinds of badness that affect the soul. Theaetetus, what are they? Visitor, one is like bodily sickness, and the other is like ugliness. Theaetetus, I don't understand. Visitor, presumably you regard sickness and discord as the same thing, don't you? Theaetetus, I don't know what I should say to that. Visitor, do you think that discord is just dissension among things that are naturally of the same kind, and arises out of some kind of corruption? Theaetetus, yes. Visitor, and ugliness is precisely a consistently unattractive sort of disproportion? Theaetetus, yes. Visitor: Well then, don't we see that there's dissension in the souls of people in poor condition, between beliefs and desires, anger and pleasures, reason and pains, and all of those things with each other? Theaetetus: Absolutely. Visitor: But all of them do have to be akin to each other. Theaetetus: Of course. Visitor: So we'd be right if we said that wickedness is discord and sickness of the soul. Theaetetus: Absolutely right. Visitor: Well then, suppose something that's in motion aims at a target and tries to hit it, but on every try passes by it and misses. Are we going to say that it does this because it's properly proportioned or because it's out of proportion? Theaetetus: Out of proportion, obviously. Visitor: But we know that no soul is willingly ignorant of anything. Theaetetus: Definitely. Visitor: But ignorance occurs precisely when a soul tries for the truth, but swerves aside from understanding and so is beside itself. Theaetetus: Of course. Visitor: So we have to take it that an ignorant soul is ugly and out of proportion. Theaetetus: It seems so. Visitor: Then there are, it appears, these two kinds of badness in the soul. Most people call one of them wickedness, but it's obviously a disease of the soul. Theaetetus: Yes. Visitor: They call the other one ignorance, but if it occurs only in a person's soul, they aren't willing to agree that it's a form of badness. Theaetetus: One thing absolutely must be granted. The point I was in doubt about when you made it just now, that there are two kinds of deficiency in the soul. We need to say that cowardice, licentiousness, and injustice are a disease in us, and that to be extremely ignorant of all sorts of things is a kind of ugliness. Visitor: In the case of the body, weren't there two kinds of expertise dealing with those two conditions? Theaetetus: What were they? Visitor: Gymnastics for ugliness and medicine for sickness. Theaetetus: Apparently. Visitor: And isn't correction the most appropriate of all kinds of expertise for treating insolence, injustice, and cowardice? Theaetetus: So it seems, to judge by what people think. Visitor: Well then, for all kinds of ignorance wouldn't be teaching the right treatment to mention? Theaetetus: Yes. Visitor: Now should we say that there's only one kind of expertise in teaching, or more than one, with two of them being the most important ones? Think about it. Theaetetus: I am. Visitor: I think we'll find it quickest this way. Theaetetus: How? Visitor: By seeing whether ignorance has a cut down the middle of it. If it has two parts, that will force teaching to have two parts too, one for each of the parts of ignorance. Theaetetus: Well, do you see what we're looking for? Visitor: I think I see a large, difficult type of ignorance marked off from the others and overshadowing all of them. Theaetetus: What's it like? Visitor: Not knowing, but thinking that you know. That's what probably causes all the mistakes we make when we think. Theaetetus: That's true. Visitor: And furthermore, it's the only kind of ignorance that's called lack of learning. Theaetetus: Certainly. Visitor: Well then, what should we call the part of teaching that gets rid of it? Theaetetus: The other part consists in the teaching of crafts, I think, but here in Athens we call this one education. Visitor: And just about all other Greeks do too. Theaetetus: But we still have to think about whether education is indivisible or has divisions that are worth mentioning. Theaetetus: We do have to think about that. Visitor: I think it can be cut somehow. Theaetetus: How? Visitor: One part of the kind of teaching that's done in words is a rough road, and the other part is smoother. Theaetetus: What do you mean by these two parts? Visitor: One of them is our forefathers' time-honored method of scolding or gently encouraging. They used to employ it especially on their sons, and many still use it on them nowadays when they do something wrong. Admonition would be the right thing to call all of this. Theaetetus: Yes. Visitor: As for the other part, some people seem to have an argument to give to themselves that lack of learning is always involuntary, and that if someone thinks he's wise, he'll never be willing to learn anything about what he thinks he's clever at. These people think that though admonition is a lot of work, it doesn't do much good. Theaetetus: They're right about that. Visitor: So they set out to get rid of the belief in one's own wisdom in another way. Theaetetus: How? Visitor: They cross-examine someone when he thinks he's saying something, though he's saying nothing. Then, since his opinions will vary inconsistently, these people will easily scrutinize them. They collect his opinions together during the discussion, put them side by side, and show that they conflict with each other at the same time on the same subjects in relation to the same things and in the same respects. The people who are being examined see this, get angry at themselves, and become calmer toward others. They lose their inflated and rigid beliefs about themselves that way, and no loss is pleasanter to hear or has a more lasting effect on them. Doctors who work on the body think it can't benefit from any food that's offered to it until what's interfering with it from inside is removed. The people who cleanse the soul, my young friend, likewise think the soul, too, won't get any advantage from any learning that's offered to it until someone shames it by refuting it, removes the opinions that interfere with learning, and exhibits it cleansed, believing that it knows only those things that it does know, and nothing more. Theaetetus, that's the best and most healthy-minded way to be. Visitor, for all these reasons, Theaetetus, we have to say that refutation is the principal and most important kind of cleansing. Conversely, we have to think that even the king of Persia, if he remains unrefuted, is uncleansed in the most important respect. He's also uneducated and ugly, in just the ways that anyone who is going to be really happy has to be completely clean and beautiful. Theaetetus, absolutely. Visitor, well then, who are we going to say the people who apply this form of expertise are? I'm afraid to call them sophists. Theaetetus, why? Visitor, so we don't pay sophists too high an honor. Theaetetus, but there's a similarity between a sophist and what we've been talking about. Visitor, and between a wolf and a dog, the wildest thing there is and the gentlest. If you're going to be safe, you have to be especially careful about similarities, since the type we're talking about is very slippery. Anyway, let that description of them stand. I certainly don't think that when the sophists are enough on their guard, the dispute will be about an unimportant distinction. Theaetetus, that seems right. Visitor, so let it be the cleansing part of the expertise of discriminating things, and let it be marked off as the part of that which concerns souls. And with that, it's teaching, and within teaching, it's education. And let's say that within education, according to the way the discussion has turned, now, the refutation of the empty belief in one's own wisdom is nothing other than our noble sophistry. Theaetetus, let's say that. But the sophist has appeared in lots of different ways, so I'm confused about what expression or assertion could convey the truth about what really is. Visitor, you're right to be confused. But we have to think that he's extremely confused too, about where he can go to escape from our account of him. The saying that you can't escape all your pursuers is right. So now, we really have to go after him. Theaetetus, right. Visitor, but let's stop first and catch our breath, so to speak. And while we're resting, let's ask ourselves, now how many different appearances has the sophist presented to us? I think we first discovered him as a hired hunter of rich young men. But he appears to have expert knowledge of lots of things. In a case like that, don't you notice that something's wrong with the way he appears? Isn't it obvious that if somebody takes him to be an expert at many things, then that observer can't be seeing clearly what it is in his expertise that all of those many pieces of learning focus on, which is why he calls him by many names instead of one. Theaetetus, that definitely does seem to be the nature of the case. Visitor, so let's not let laziness make that happen to us. First, let's take up one of the things we said about the sophist before, which seemed to me to exhibit him especially clearly. Theaetetus, what is it? Visitor, we said that he engages in disputes, didn't we? Theaetetus, yes. Visitor, and also that he teaches other people to do the same thing too. Theaetetus, of course. Visitor, then let's think what subject do people like him claim to make others able to engage in disputes about. Let's start with something like this. Do sophists make people competent to dispute about issues about the gods, which are opaque to most people? Theaetetus, well, people say they do. Visitor, and also things that are open to view on the earth and in the sky and related matters? Theaetetus, of course. Visitor, and when people make general statements in private discussions about being and coming to be, we know that sophists are clever at contradicting them, and they also make other people able to do the same thing? Theaetetus, absolutely. Visitor, and what about laws and all kinds of political issues? Don't sophists promise to make people capable of engaging in controversies about them? Theaetetus, if they didn't promise that, practically no one would bother to discuss anything with them. Visitor, as a matter of fact, you can find anything you need to say to contradict any expert himself, both in general and within each particular field, laid out, published, and written down for anybody who wants to learn it. Theaetetus, apparently you're talking about Protagoras on wrestling and other fields of expertise. Visitor, and on many other things too, my friend. In fact, take expertise in disputation as a whole. Doesn't it seem like a capacity that's sufficient for carrying on controversies about absolutely everything? Theaetetus, it doesn't seem to leave much of anything out, anyway. Visitor, but for heaven's sake, my boy, do you think that's possible? Or maybe you young people see into this issue more keenly than we do. Theaetetus, into what? What are you getting at? I don't fully understand what you're asking. Visitor, whether it's possible for any human being to know everything. Theaetetus, if it were, sir, we'd be very well off. Visitor, but how could someone who didn't know about a subject make a sound objection against someone who knew about it? Theaetetus, he couldn't. Visitor, then what is it in the sophist's capacity that's so amazing? Theaetetus, about what? Visitor, how the sophists can ever make young people believe they're wiser than everyone else about everything. It's obvious that they didn't make correct objections against anyone, or didn't appear so to young people, or if they did appear to make correct objections, but their controversies didn't make them look any the wiser for it, then, just as you say, people could hardly be willing to pay them money to become their students. Theaetetus, right. Dang it. Oh, Theaetetus, right. Visitor, but people are willing to? Theaetetus, they certainly are. Visitor, since sophists do seem, I think, to know about the things they dispute about. Theaetetus, of course. Visitor, and they do it, we say, about every subject? Yes. Visitor, so to their students they appear wise about everything? Of course. Visitor, but without actually being wise, since that appeared impossible. Theaetetus, of course it's impossible. Visitor, so the sophist has now appeared as having a kind of belief, knowledge about everything, but not truth. Theaetetus, absolutely. What you said about them is probably just right. Visitor, but let's consider a pattern that will exhibit them more clearly. Theaetetus, what pattern is that? Visitor, this one. Pay attention to me and try to do a good job of answering my questions. Theaetetus, which questions? Visitor, if someone claimed that by a single kind of expertise he could know not just how to say things or to contradict people, but how to make and do everything, then, Theaetetus, what do you mean everything? Visitor, you don't understand the first thing I say. Seemingly you don't understand everything. Theaetetus, no I don't. Visitor, well I mean everything to include you and me, and also the other animals and plants. Theaetetus, what are you talking about? Visitor, if someone claimed that he'd make you and me and all the other living things. Theaetetus, what kind of making are you talking about? You're not talking about some kind of gardener after all. You did say he made animals. Visitor, yes, and I also mean the sea and earth and heavens and gods and everything else. And furthermore, he makes them each quickly and sells them at a low price. Theaetetus, you're talking about some kind of game for school children. Visitor, well, if someone says he knows everything and would teach it to someone else cheaply and quickly, shouldn't we think it's a game? Theaetetus, of course. Visitor, do you know of any game that involves more expertise than imitation does, and is more engaging? Theaetetus, no, not at all, since you've collected everything together and designated a very broad, extremely diverse type. Visitor, so think about the man who promises he can make everything by means of a single kind of expertise. Suppose that by being expert at drawing he produces things that have the same names as real things. Then we know that when he shows his drawings from far away, he'll be able to fool the more mindless young children into thinking that he can actually produce anything he wants to. Theaetetus, of course. Visitor, well then, won't we expect that there's another kind of expertise, this time having to do with words, and that someone can use it to trick young people when they stand even farther away from the truth about things? Wouldn't he do it by putting words in their ears, and by showing them spoken copies of everything, so as to make them believe that the words are true and that the person who's speaking to them is the wisest person there is? Theaetetus, yes. Why shouldn't there be that kind of expertise too? Visitor: So, Theaetetus, suppose enough time has passed, and the Sophist hearers have gotten older, and that they approach closer to real things and are forced by their experiences to touch up palpably against them. Won't most of them inevitably change their earlier beliefs, which made large things appear small and easy things appear hard? And won't the facts that they've encountered in the course of their actions completely overturn all the appearances that had come to them in the form of words? Theaetetus: Yes, at least as far as what someone my age can tell. But I think I'm one of the young people who are still standing far away from real things. Visitor: That's why all of us here will keep trying to take you as close to them as possible. But without your need those experiences to force you. But tell me about the Sophist. Is it obvious by now that he's a kind of cheat who imitates real things? Or are we still in any doubt about whether he truly knows all the things that he seems to be able to engage in controversies about? Theaetetus: But sir, how could we be in any doubt? By this time it's pretty obvious from what we said that he's one of those people who play games. Visitor: So we have to regard him as a cheat and an imitator. Theaetetus: How could we avoid it? Visitor: Well, now it's our job not to let the beast escape. We've also almost hemmed him in with one of those net-like devices that words provide for things like this. So anyway, he won't get away from this next point. Theaetetus: What is it? Visitor: From being taken to be a kind of magician. Theaetetus: That's what he seems to me to be too. Visitor: So it's settled. We'll divide the craft of copy-making as quickly as we can, and we'll go down into it. Then if the Sophist gives up right away, we'll obey the royal command, and we'll capture him and hand our catch over to the king. But if the Sophist slips down somewhere into the parts of the craft of imitation, we'll follow along with him, and we'll divide each of the parts that contain him until we catch him. Anyway, neither he nor any other type will ever be able to boast that he's escaped from the method of people who are able to chase a thing through both the particular and the general. Theaetetus: Good, that's how we have to do it. Visitor: Going by the method of division that we've used so far, I think I see two types of imitation here too, but I don't think I can clearly tell yet which one the type or form we're looking for is in. Theaetetus: Well, first tell us what distinction you mean. Visitor: One type of imitation I see is the art of likeness making. That's the one we have whenever someone produces an imitation by keeping to the proportions of length, breadth, and depth of his model, and also by keeping to the appropriate colors of its parts. Theaetetus: But don't all imitators try to do that? Visitor: Not the ones who sculpt or draw very large objects. If they reproduce the true proportions of their beautiful subjects, you see, the upper parts would appear smaller than they should, and the lower parts would appear larger, because we see the upper parts from farther away, and the lower parts from closer. Theaetetus: Of course. Visitors: So don't those craftsmen say goodbye to truth, and produce in their images the proportions that seem to be beautiful instead of the real ones? Theaetetus: Absolutely. Visitors: So can't the first sort of image be called a likeness, since it's like the thing? Theaetetus: Yes. Visitor: And as we said before, the part of imitation that deals with that should be called likeness making. Theaetetus: Yes. Visitor: Now what are we going to call something that appears to be like a beautiful thing, but only because it's seen from a viewpoint that's not beautiful? It would seem unlike the thing it claims to be like if you came to be able to see such large things adequately. If it appears the way the thing does, but in fact it isn't like it, isn't it an appearance? Theaetetus: Of course. Visitor: And this part of imitation covers a great deal of painting and the rest of imitation. Theaetetus: Of course. Visitor: Wouldn't appearance making be the right thing to call expertise in producing appearances that aren't likenesses? Theaetetus: Yes, definitely. Visitor: Well, these are the two types of copy making I meant, likeness making and appearance making. Theaetetus: You were right about that. Visitor: But still, I can't see clearly the thing I was in doubt about then, namely, which type we should put the Sophist in. He's really an amazing man, very hard to make out. He's still escaped neatly into an impossibly confusing type to search through. Theaetetus: It seems that way. Visitor, are you agreeing with me because you know that? Or is it that the current dragging you, or so to speak, into agreement so quickly because the discussion has given you a habit of agreeing? Theaetetus, what do you mean? Why do you say that? Visitor, really, my young friend, this is a very difficult investigation we're engaged in. This appearing, and this seeming but not being, and this saying things but not true things, all these issues are full of confusion, just as they always have been. It's extremely hard, Theaetetus, to say what form of speech we should use to say that there really is such a thing as false saying or believing, and moreover, to utter this without being caught in a verbal conflict. Theaetetus, why? Visitor, because this form of speech of ours involves the rash assumption that which is not is, since otherwise falsity wouldn't come into being. But when we were boys, my boy, the great Parmenides testified to us from start to finish, speaking in both prose and poetic rhythms, that never shall this force itself up on us, that which is not may be. While you search, keep your thought far away from this path. So we have his testimony to this, and our own way of speaking itself would make the point especially obvious if we examined it a little. So if it's all the same to you, let's look at that first. As far as I'm concerned, you can do what you want, but as far as our way of speaking is concerned, think about how it will go best, and follow along with it and take me along the road with you. Visitor, that's what we have to do. Tell me, do we dare to utter the sound that which in no way is? Theaetetus, of course. Visitor, but suppose one of our listeners weren't debating, or playing a game, but had to think seriously and answer the following question. What should the name, that which is not, be applied to? Why do we think he'd use it, and in what connection, and for what purpose? And what would he indicate by it to someone else who wanted to find out about it? Theaetetus, that's a hard question. In fact, it's just about completely, impossibly confusing for someone like me to answer. Visitor, but anyway, this much is obvious to us. That which is not can't be applied to any of those which are. Theaetetus, of course not. Visitor, so if you can't apply it to that which is, it wouldn't be right either to apply it to something. Theaetetus, why not? Visitor, it's obvious to us that we always apply this something to a being, since it's impossible to say it by itself, as if it were naked and isolated from all beings. Isn't that right? Theaetetus, yes. Visitor, are you agreeing because you're thinking that a person who says something has to be saying some one thing? Theaetetus, yes. Visitor, since you'd say that something is a sign of one, and that a couple of things is a sign of two, and some things is a sign of a plurality? Theaetetus, of course. Visitor, and it's absolutely necessary, it seems, that someone who does not say something says nothing at all. Theaetetus, yes. Visitor, therefore, don't we have to refuse to admit that a person like that speaks but says nothing? Instead, don't we have to deny that anyone who tries to utter that which is not even speaking? Theaetetus, then our way of speaking would have reached the height of confusion. Visitor, don't do any boasting yet. There are still more confusions to come, including the primary and most fundamental one, which actually happens to be the source of the whole problem. Theaetetus, what do you mean? Don't hold back. Tell me. Visitor, to that which is there might belong some other of those which are. Theaetetus, of course. Visitor, but shall we say that any of those which are can never belong to that which is not? Theaetetus, how could they? Visitor, now then, we take all the numbers to be beings. Theaetetus, yes, if we take anything else to be. Visitor, then let's not even try to apply either plurality of number or one to that which is not. Theaetetus, our way of speaking itself tells us that it would be wrong to try to. Visitor, then how would anyone try either to say those which are not or that which is not out loud, or even grasp them in thought, apart from number? Theaetetus, tell me. Visitor, whenever we speak of those which are not, aren't we trying to apply numerical plurality to them? Theaetetus, of course. Visitor, and when we speak of that which is not, aren't we applying one to it? Theaetetus, obviously. Visitor, but we say it isn't either right or correct to try to attach that which is to that which is not. Theaetetus, that's absolutely true. Visitor, you understand then that it's impossible to say, speak, or think that which is not itself correctly by itself? It's unthinkable, unsayable, unutterable, and unformulable in speech. Theaetetus, absolutely. Visitor, so I was wrong just now when I said that I would formulate the biggest confusion about it, when we have this other one to state which is even bigger? Theaetetus, what is it? Visitor, my good young friend, don't you notice on the basis of the things we said that that which is not even confuses the person who's refuting it in just this way, that whenever someone tries to refute it, he's forced to say mutually contrary things about it? Theaetetus, what do you mean? Say it more clearly. Visitor, you shouldn't expect more clarity from me. I was the one who made the statement that that which is not should not share either in one or in plurality. But even so, I've continued after all that to speak of it as one, since I say that which is not. You understand? Theaetetus, yes. Visitor, and again a little earlier I said that it is unutterable, unsayable, and inexpressible in speech. Do you follow? Theaetetus, I follow, of course. Visitor, so in trying to attach being to it, wasn't I saying things that were the contrary of what I'd said before? Theaetetus, apparently. Visitor, and attaching that which, wasn't I speaking of it as one? Theaetetus, yes. Visitor, and also in speaking of it as something inexpressible in speech, unsayable and unutterable, I was speaking of it as one thing. Theaetetus, of course. Visitor, but we say that if someone speaks correctly, he shouldn't definitely fix it as either one or plural. He shouldn't even call it at all, since even calling it by that label, he'd be addressing it by means of the form one. Theaetetus, absolutely. Visitor, then what would somebody say about me? He'd find that the refutation of that which is not has been defeating me for a long time. So as I said, let's not use what I say to help us think of how to speak correctly about that which is not. Come on, let's use what you say instead. Theaetetus, what do you mean? Visitor, come on, pull yourself together for us, as well as you can, and try it, since you're young. Try to say something correct about that which is not, without attaching either being one or numerical plurality to it. Theaetetus, I'd have to have a strangely large amount of enthusiasm for the project to try it myself after seeing what you've gone through. Visitor, well, let's give up on both you and me, if you prefer. But until we meet someone who can do it, let's say that the sophist has stopped at nothing. He's escaped down into inaccessible confusion. Theaetetus, he certainly seems to have. Visitor, so if we say he has some expertise in appearance making, it will be easy for him to grab hold of our use of words in return and twist our words in the contrary direction. Whenever we call him a copy maker, he'll ask us what in the world we mean by a copy. We need to think, Theaetetus, about how to answer the young man's question. Theaetetus, obviously we'll say we mean copies in water and mirrors, and also copies that are drawn and stamped and everything else like that. Visitor, evidently, Theaetetus, you haven't seen a sophist. Theaetetus, why do you say that? Visitor, he'll seem to you to have his eyes shut, or else not to have any eyes at all. Theaetetus, how? Visitor, he'll laugh at what you say when you answer him that way, with talk about things in mirrors or sculptures. And when you think to him as if he could see, he'll pretend he doesn't know about mirrors, or water, or even sight, and he'll put his question to you only in terms of words. Theaetetus, what sort of question? Visitor, he'll ask about what runs through all those things which you call many, but which you thought you should call by the one name, copy, to cover them all, as if they were all one thing. Say something then, and defend yourself, and don't give any ground to him. Theaetetus, what in the world would we say a copy is, sir, except something that's made similar to a true thing, and is another thing that's like it? Visitor, you're saying it's another true thing like it? Or what do you mean by like it? Theaetetus, not that it's true at all, but that it resembles the true thing. Visitor, meaning by true, really being? Theaetetus, yes. Visitor, and meaning by not true, contrary of true? Theaetetus, of course. Visitor, so you're saying that that which is like is not really that which is, if you speak of it as not true. Theaetetus, but it is, in a way. Visitor, but not truly, you say. Theaetetus: No, except that it really is a likeness. Visitor: So it's not really what is, but it really is what we call a likeness. Theaetetus: Maybe that which is not is woven together with that which is in some way like that. It's quite bizarre. Visitor: Of course it's strange. Anyway, you can see that the many-headed sophist is still using this interweaving to force us to agree unwillingly that that which is not, in a way, is. Theaetetus: I definitely do see it. Visitor: Well then, how can we define his field of expertise so as to be consistent? Theaetetus: What do you mean? What kind of problem are you afraid of? Visitor: When we say that he deceives us about appearances and that he's an expert at deception, are we saying so because his expertise makes our souls believe what is false? Or what shall we say? Theaetetus: Just that. What else would we say? Visitor: Again, a false belief will be a matter of believing things that are contrary to those which are, or what? Theaetetus: Yes, contrary. Visitor: So you're saying that a false belief is believing those which are not? Theaetetus: Necessarily. Visitor: Believing that those which are not, or that those which in no way are in a way are? Theaetetus: That those which are not are in a way, it has to be, if anyone is ever going to be even a little bit wrong. Visitor: Well, doesn't a false belief also believe that those which completely are in no way are? Theaetetus: Yes. Visitor: And this is false too? Theaetetus: Yes. Visitor: And I think we'll also regard false speaking the same way, as saying that those which are not, and that those which are not are. Theaetetus: How else would it be false? Visitor: I don't suppose there's any other way. The sophist, though, is going to deny that this way is possible, and how could any sensible person accept it now that what we agreed to earlier has been reinforced? We understand what he's saying, Theaetetus? Theaetetus: How could we not understand that when we dare to say that falsity is in beliefs and words contain falsity, we're saying what is contrary to what we said just before? We're forced to attach that which is to that which is not, even though we agreed just now that that's completely impossible. Visitor: Your memory's correct, but think about what we need to do about the sophist. You see how many and easily available his supply of objections and confusions is if we assume, as we search for him, that he's an expert at cheating and falsehood making. Theaetetus: Definitely. Visitor: He's got a practically an infinite supply of them, and we've gone through only a small fraction. Theaetetus: If so, then it seems it would be impossible to catch him. Visitor: What then? Are we going to go soft and give up? Theaetetus: I say we shouldn't, if there's even the smallest chance that we can catch him. Visitor: So you'll be forgiving and, as you said, happy if we can somehow extricate ourselves, even slightly, from such a powerful argument? Theaetetus: Of course. Visitor: Then I've got something even more urgent to request. Theaetetus: What? Visitor: Not to think that I'm turning into some kind of patricide. Theaetetus: What do you mean? Visitor: In order to defend ourselves, we're going to have to subject Father Parmenides' saying to further examination, and insist by brute force that both that which is not somehow is, and then again that that which is somehow is not. Theaetetus: It does seem that in what we're going to say, we'll have to fight through that issue. Visitor: That's obvious even to a blind man, as they say. We'll never be able to avoid having to make ourselves ridiculous by saying conflicting things whenever we talk about false statements and beliefs, either as copies or likenesses, or imitations or appearances, or about whatever sorts of expertise there are concerning those things, unless, that is, we either refute Parmenides' claims or else agree to accept them. Theaetetus: That's true. Visitor: So that's why we have to be bold enough to attack what our father says. Or, if fear keeps us from doing that, then we'll have to leave it alone completely. Theaetetus: Fear, anyway, isn't going to stop us. Visitor: Well then, I've got a third thing to ask you, something small. Theaetetus: Just tell me what it is. Visitor: When I was talking a minute ago, I said that I've always given up whenever I've tried to refute what Parmenides said, just the way I did this time. Theaetetus: Yes, you did say that. Visitor: I'm afraid I'll seem insane to you if I'm always shifting my position back and forth, given what I've said. It's for your sake that we'll be trying to refute what Parmenides said, if we can do it. Theaetetus: Go ahead then. Don't worry about that. I won't think you're behaving inappropriately in any way if you go right ahead with your refutation and demonstration. Visitor: Well then, how shall I begin this dangerous discussion? The path we absolutely have to turn on to, my boy, is this. Theaetetus: Namely? Visitor: We have to reconsider whether we may not be somehow confused about things that now seem to be clear, and whether over hasty judgment may make us agree too easily. Theaetetus: Say what you mean more clearly. Visitor: Parmenides' way of talking to us has been rather easygoing, it seems to me. So does the way of talking that everyone uses who has ever urged us to specify just how many things there are and what they're like. Theaetetus: How? Visitor: They each appeared to me to tell us a myth, as if we were children. One tells us that there are three beings, and that sometimes they're somehow at war with each other, while at other times they become friendly, marry, give birth, and bring up their offspring. Another one says that there are two beings, wet and dry or hot and cold. He marries them off and makes them set up house together, and are Eleatic tribe, starting from Xenophanes, and even people before him, tells us their myth on the assumption that what they call all things are just one. Later on, some Ionian and Sicilian muses both had the idea that it was safer to weave the two views together. They say that which is both many and one, and is bound by both hatred and friendship. According to the terser of these muses, in being taken apart, they're brought together. The more relaxed muses, though, allow things to be free from that condition sometimes. They say that all that there is alternate, and that sometimes it's one and friendly under Aphrodite's influence, but at other times it's many and at war with itself because of some kind of strife. It's hard to say whether any one of these thinkers has told us the truth or not, and it wouldn't be appropriate for us to be critical of such renowned and venerable men, but it wouldn't be offensive to note the following thing either. Theaetetus: What? Visitor: That they've overlooked the many of us and belittled us. They've simply been talking their way through their explanations without paying any attention to whether we were following them or were left behind. Theaetetus: What do you mean? Visitor: For heaven's sake, Theaetetus, do you understand anything of what they mean each time one of them says that many or one or two things are or have become or are becoming, or when another one speaks of hot mixed with cold and supposes that there are separations and combinations? Earlier in my life, I used to think I understood exactly what someone meant when he said just what we're confused about now, namely, this is not. You do see what confusion we're in about it. Theaetetus: Yes, I do. Visitor: But just perhaps the very same thing has happened to us equally about is. We say we're in the clear about it, and that we understand when someone says it, but that we don't understand is not. But maybe we're in the same state about both. Theaetetus: Maybe. Visitor: And let's suppose the same thing may be true of the other expressions we've just used. Theaetetus: All right. Visitor: We can look into most of them later, if that seems to be the best thing to do. Now we'll think about the most fundamental and most important expression. Theaetetus: Which one? Well, obviously you're saying that being is the one we have to explore first. That we have to ask what people who say it think they're indicating by it. Visitor: You understand exactly, Theaetetus. I'm saying we have to follow the track this way. Let's ask, as if they were here. Listen, you people who say that all things are just some two things, hot and cold, or some such pair. What are you saying about them both when you say that they both are and each one is? We shall take this being to be? Is it a third thing alongside those two beings, so that according to you everything is no longer two but three? Surely in calling one or the other of the two of them being, you aren't saying that they both are, since then in either case they'd be one and not two. Theaetetus: That's true. Visitor: But you do want to call both of them being? Theaetetus: Probably. Visitor: But, we'll say, if you did that, friends, you'd also be saying very clearly that the two are one. Theaetetus: That's absolutely right. Visitor, then clarify this for us, since we're confused about it. What do you want to signify when you say being? Obviously, you've known for a long time. We thought we did, but now we're confused about it. So first teach it to us, so we won't think we understand what you're saying when just the contrary is the case. Would it be the least bit inappropriate for us to ask them this, and anyone else who says that everything is more than one? Theaetetus, not at all. Visitor, well then, shouldn't we do our best to find out from the people who say that everything is one what they mean by being? Theaetetus, of course. Visitor, then they should answer this question. Do you say that only one thing is? We do, they'll say, won't they? Theaetetus, yes. Visitor, well then, you call something being? Theaetetus, yes. Visitor, is that just what you call one, so that you'd use two names for the same thing, or what? Theaetetus, how will they answer that question? Visitor, obviously it's not the easiest thing in the world to answer that question, or any other question either, for someone who makes the supposition that they do. Theaetetus, why not? Visitor, surely it's absurd for someone to agree that there are two names when he maintains that there's only one thing. Theaetetus, of course. Visitor, and it's completely absurd and unacceptable for someone to say that there's a name if there's no account of it. Theaetetus, what do you mean? Visitor, if he supposes that a thing is different from its name, then surely he's mentioning two things. Theaetetus, yes. Visitor, and moreover, if he supposes that the name is the same thing, is the same as the thing, he'll either be forced to say that the name is the name of nothing, or else, if he says that it's the name of something, then it's the name of nothing other than itself, and so will turn out to be only the name of a name and nothing else. Theaetetus, yes. Visitor, and also the one, being the name of the one, will also be the one of the name. Theaetetus, it will have to be. Visitor, well then, will they say that the whole is different from the one being, or the same as it? Theaetetus, of course they'll say it's the same, and they do. Visitor, but suppose a whole is, as even Parmenides says, all around like the bulk of a well-formed sphere, equal balanced all ways from the middle, since neither anything more must it be, this way or that, nor anything else. If it's like that, then that which is will have a middle and extremities, and if it has those, then it absolutely has to have parts, doesn't it? Theaetetus, yes. Visitor, but if a thing has parts, then nothing keeps it from having the characteristic of being one in all its parts, and in that way it's all being and it's also one whole. Theaetetus, of course. Visitor, but something with that characteristic can't be just the one itself, can it? Theaetetus, why not? Visitor, surely a thing that's truly one, properly speaking, has to be completely without parts. Theaetetus, yes. Visitor, but a thing like that, like what we've described, which consists of many parts, won't fit that account. Theaetetus, I understand. Visitor, now if that which is has the characteristic of the one in this way, will it be one and a whole? Or shall we simply deny it's a whole at all? Theaetetus, that's a hard choice. Visitor, you're right. If it has this characteristic of somehow being one, it won't appear to be the same as the one. Moreover, everything will then be more than one. Theaetetus, yes. Side note, Plato is relying on the thought that if the terms one and name designate one thing in the sense that he assumes is relevant, then they are interchangeable even to the point of generating the strange phrase, the one of the name. Visitor, further, if that which is not a whole by possessing that as a characteristic, but rather just is the whole itself, that which is will turn out to be less than itself. Theaetetus, certainly. Visitor, and because it's deprived of itself, that which is and because it's deprived of itself, that which is will be not being, according to that account. Theaetetus, yes. Visitor, and everything will be more than one, since that which is and the whole will each have its own separate in nature. Theaetetus, yes. Visitor, but if the whole is not at all, then the very same things are true of that which is, and in addition to not being, it would not even become a being. Theaetetus, why not? Visitor, invariably whatever becomes has at some point become as a whole, so we can't label either being or becoming as being without taking the whole to be among the beings too. Theaetetus, that seems entirely right. Visitor, and moreover, something that isn't a whole can't be of any quantity at all, And something that's of a certain quantity has to be a whole of that quantity, whatever it may be. Theaetetus, exactly. Visitor, and millions of other issues will also arise, each generating indefinitely many confusions, if you say that being is only two or one. Theaetetus, the ones that just turned up show that. One problem led to another, and at each step there was more and more difficulty and uncertainty about what we just said at the previous stage. Visitor, we haven't gone through all the detailed accounts that people give of that which is and that which is not, but this is enough. Now we have to look at the people who discuss the issue in another way. Our aim is to have them all in view, and that way to see that saying that what that which isn't a bit easier than saying what that which is not is. Theaetetus. So we need to go on to these people too. Visitor, it seems that there's something like a battle of gods and giants among them, because of their dispute with each other over being. Theaetetus. How? Visitor, one group drags everything down to earth from the heavenly region of the invisible, actually clutching rocks and trees with their hands. When they take hold of these things, they insist that only what offers tangible contact is, since they define being as the same as body. And if any of the others say that something without a body is, they absolutely despise him and won't listen to him anymore. Theaetetus, these are frightening men you're talking about. I've met quite a lot of them already. Visitor, therefore the people on the other side of the debate defend their position very cautiously, from somewhere up out of sight. They insist violently that true being is certainly non-bodily forms that can be thought about. They take the bodies of the other group and also what they call the truth, and they break them up verbally into little bits and call them a process of being, a process of coming to be instead of being. There's a never-ending battle going on constantly between them about this issue. Theaetetus, that's true. Visitor, let's talk with each of these groups about the being that they posit. Theaetetus, how shall we do it? Visitor, it's easier to talk with the ones who put being in the forms. They're gentler people. It's harder and perhaps just about impossible with the ones who drag everything down to body by force. It seems to me that we have to deal with them this way. Theaetetus, namely? Visitor, mainly by making them actually better than they are. If we somehow could. But if we can't do that in fact, then let's do it in words, by supposing that they're willing to answer less wildly than they actually do. Something that better people agree to is worth more than what worse ones agree to. Anyway, we're not concerned with the people. We're looking for what's true. Theaetetus, that's absolutely right. Visitor, then tell the better people to answer you and interpret what they say. Theaetetus, all right. Visitor, then let them tell us this. Do they say that anything is a mortal animal? Theaetetus, of course they do. Visitor, and they agree that a mortal animal is an ensouled body? Theaetetus, of course. Visitor, and so they're placing soul among the beings. Theaetetus, yes. Visitor, what then? Do they say that this soul is just and that soul is unjust? And that this one's intelligent and that one isn't and that one isn't? Theaetetus, of course. Visitor, but isn't a soul just by the possession and presence of justice, and isn't another soul contrary to it by the possession and presence of the contrary? Theaetetus, yes, they agree with that. Visitor, but they'll say further that at any rate, what can be present to a thing or absent from it is something. Theaetetus, yes. Visitor, so since there is justice and intelligence and the rest of virtue, and also their contraries, and moreover, since there is a soul in which those things come to be present, do they say that any of these are visible or touchable, or that they are all invisible? Theaetetus, they can hardly say any of them is visible. Visitor, and what about these invisible things? Do they say that they have bodies? Theaetetus, they don't give one single answer to that question. They do say that the soul seems to them to have a kind of body, but as far as intelligence and the other things you've asked about are concerned, they're ashamed and don't dare either to agree that they are not beings or to insist that they are all bodies. Visitor, obviously this breed of men has improved. Theaetetus, the native earth-born giants would never have been ashamed to hold the line for their position, that anything they can't squeeze in their hands is absolutely nothing. Theaetetus, That pretty much describes their thinking. Visitor: Then let's go back to questioning them. It's enough if they admit that even a small part of that which doesn't have body. They need to say something about what's common to both it and the things that do have body, which they focus on when they say that they both are. Maybe that will raise some confusion for them. If it does, then think about whether they'd be willing to accept our suggestion that that which is something like the following. Theaetetus: Like what? Tell me and maybe we'll know. Visitor: I'm saying that a thing really is if it has any capacity at all, either by nature to do something to something else, or to have even the smallest thing done to it by even the most trivial thing, even if it only happens once. I'll take it as a definition that those which are amount to nothing other than capacity. Theaetetus: They accept that, since they don't have anything better to say right now. Visitor: Fine. Maybe something else will occur to them later, and to us too. For now, let's agree with them on this much. Theaetetus: All right. Visitor: Let's turn to the other people, the friends of the forms. You serve as their interpreter for us. Theaetetus: All right. Visitor: You people distinguish coming to be and being and say that they are separate, is that right? Theaetetus: Yes. Visitor: And you say that by our bodies and through our perception we have dealings with coming to be, but we deal with real being by our souls. And through reasoning. You say that being always stays the same and in the same state, but coming to be varies from one time to another. Theaetetus: We do say that. Visitor: And what shall we say this dealing with is that you apply in the two cases? Doesn't it mean that what we said just now? Theaetetus: What? Visitor: What happens when two things come together, and by some capacity one does something to the other, or has something done to it? Or maybe you don't hear their answer clearly. Theaetetus: But I do, probably because I'm used to them. Theaetetus: Then what account do we give? Then what account do they give? Visitor: They don't agree with what we just said to the earth people about being. Theaetetus: What's that? Visitor: We took it as a sufficient definition of beings that the capacity be present in a thing to do something or have something done to it, to or by even the smallest thing or degree. Theaetetus: Yes. Visitor: In reply, they say that coming to be has the capacity to do something or have something done to it, but that this capacity doesn't fit with being. Theaetetus: Is there anything to that? Visitor: We have to reply that we need them to tell us more clearly whether they agree that the soul knows and also that being is known. Theaetetus: Yes, they say. Visitor: Well then, do you say that knowing and being known are cases of doing or having something done, or both? Is one of them doing and the other having something done? Or is neither a case of either? Theaetetus: Obviously that neither is a case of either, since otherwise they'd be saying something contrary to what they said before. Visitor: Oh, I see. You mean that if knowing is doing something, then necessarily what is known has something done to it. When being is known by knowledge, according to this account, then insofar as it's known, it's changed by having something done to it, which we say wouldn't happen to something that's at rest. Theaetetus: That's correct. Visitor: But for heaven's sake, are we going to be convinced that it's true that change, life, soul, and intelligence are not present in that which wholly is, and that it neither lives nor thinks, but stays changeless, solemn, and holy without any understanding? Theaetetus: If we did, sir, we'd be admitting something frightening. Visitor: But are we going to say that it has understanding but doesn't have life? Theaetetus: Of course not. Visitor: But are we saying that it has both those things in it while denying that it has them in a soul? Theaetetus: How else would it have them? Visitor: And are we saying that it has intelligence, life, and soul, but that it's at rest and completely changeless even though it's alive? Theaetetus: All that seems completely unreasonable. Visitor: Then both that which changes and also change have to be admitted as being. Theaetetus: Of course. Visitor: And so, Theaetetus, it turns out that if no beings change, then nothing anywhere possesses any intelligence about anything. Theaetetus: Absolutely not. Visitor: But furthermore, if we admit that everything is moving and changing, then on that account we take the very same thing away from those which are. Theaetetus: Why? Visitor: Do you think that without rest anything would be the same, in the same state, in the same respects? Theaetetus, not at all. Visitor, well then, do you see any case in which intelligence is or comes to be anywhere without these things? Theaetetus, not in the least. Visitor, and we need to use every argument we can to fight against anyone who does away with knowledge, understanding, and intelligence, but at the same time asserts anything at all about anything. Theaetetus, definitely. Visitor, the philosopher, the person who values these things the most, absolutely has to refuse to accept the claim that everything is at rest, either from defenders of the one or from friends of the many forms. In addition, he has to refuse to listen to people who make that which is change in every way. He has to be like a child begging for both, and say that which is everything, is both the unchanging and that which changes. Theaetetus, true. Visitor, well now, apparently we've done a fine job of making our account pull together that which is, haven't we? Theaetetus, absolutely. Visitor, but for heaven's sake, Theaetetus, now I think we'll recognize how confused our investigation about it is. Theaetetus, why though? What do you mean? Visitor, don't you notice, my young friend, that we're now in extreme ignorance about it, though it appears to us that we're saying something? Theaetetus, it does to me anyway, but I don't completely understand how we got into this situation without noticing. Visitor, then I think more clearly about it. Given what we've just agreed to, would it be fair for someone to ask us the same question we earlier asked the people who say that everything is just hot and cold? Theaetetus, what is it? Remind me. Visitor, certainly, and I'll try at any rate to do it by asking you in the same way as I asked them, so that we can move forward at the same pace. Theaetetus, good. Visitor, now then, wouldn't you say that change and rest are completely contrary to each other? Theaetetus, of course. Visitor, and you'd say they both equally are, and that each of them equally is? Theaetetus, yes. Visitor, when you admit that they are you saying that both and each of them change? Theaetetus, not at all. Visitor, and are you signifying that they rest when you say that they both are? Theaetetus, of course not. Visitor, so do you conceive that which is as a third thing alongside them, which encompasses rest and change? And when you say that they both are you taking the two of them together and focusing on their association with being? Theaetetus, it does seem probably true that when we say change and rest are, we do have a kind of omen of that which is as a third thing. Visitor, so that which isn't both change and rest, it's something different from them instead. Theaetetus, it seems so. Visitor, therefore, by its own nature, that which is doesn't either rest or change. Theaetetus, I suppose it doesn't. Visitor, which way should something turn his thoughts, if he wants to establish for himself something clear about it? Theaetetus, I don't know. Visitor, I don't think any line is easy. If something isn't changing, how can it not be resting? And how can something not change if it doesn't in any way rest? But now that which appears to fall outside both of them, is that possible? Theaetetus, absolutely not. Visitor, in this connection we ought to remember the following. Theaetetus, what? Visitor, when we were asked what we should apply the name that which is not to, we became completely confused. You remember? Theaetetus, of course. Visitor, and now we aren't in just as much confusion about that which is? Theaetetus, we seem to be in even more confusion, if that's possible. Visitor, then we've now given a complete statement of our confusion. But there's now hope, precisely because both that which is and that which is not are involved in equal confusion. That is, insofar as one of them is clarified, either brightly or dimly, the other will be too. And if we can't see either of them, then anyway we'll push our account of both of them forward as well as we can. Theaetetus, fine. Visitor, let's give an account of how we call the very same thing, whatever it may be, by several names. Theaetetus, what, for instance? Give me an example. Visitor, surely we're speaking of a man, even when we name him several things, that is, when we apply colors to him in shapes, sizes, defects, and virtues. In these cases, and a million others, we say that he's not only a man, but also is good and indefinitely many different things. And similarly, on the same account, we take a thing to be one, and at the same time, we speak of it as many by using many names for it. Theaetetus, that's true. Visitor, out of all this, we've prepared a feast for young people and for old late learners. They can grab hold of the handy idea that it's impossible for that which is many to be one, and for that which is one to be many. They evidently enjoy forbidding us to say that a man is good, and only letting us say that that which is good, or that the man is a man. You've often met people, I suppose, who are carried away by things like that. Sometimes they're elderly people who are amazed at this kind of thing, because their understanding is so poor, and they think they've discovered something prodigiously wise. Theaetetus, of course. Visitor, then let's direct our questions now both to these people, and also to the others which we were talking with before. That way our account will be addressed to everyone who's ever said anything at all about being. Theaetetus, what questions do you mean? Visitor, shall we refuse to apply being to change or to rest, or anything to anything else? Shall we take these things to be unblended and incapable of having a share of each other in the things we in the things we say? Or shall we pull them all together and treat them all as capable of associating with each other? Or shall we say that some can associate and some can't? Which of these options shall we say they'd choose, Theaetetus? Theaetetus, I don't know how to answer for them. Visitor, why don't you reply to the options one by one, by thinking about what results from each of them? Theaetetus, fine. Visitor, first, if you like, let's take them to say that nothing has any capacity at all for association with anything. Then change and rest won't have any share in being. Theaetetus, no they won't. Visitor, well then, will either of them be, if they have no association with being? Theaetetus, no. Visitor, it seems that agreeing to that destroys everything right away, both for the people who make everything change, for the ones who make everything an unchanging unit, and for the ones who say that beings are forms that always stay the same and in the same state. All of these people apply being. Some do it when they say that things really are changing, and others do it when they say that things really are at rest. Theaetetus, absolutely. Visitor, also there are people who put everything together at one time and divide them at another. Some put them together into one and divide them into indefinitely many, and others divide them into a finite number of elements and put them back together out of them. None of these people, regardless of whether they take this to happen, stages, or continuously, would be saying anything if there isn't any blending. Theaetetus, right. Visitor, but furthermore, the most ridiculous account is the one that's adopted by the people who won't allow anything to be called by a name that it gets by association with something else. Theaetetus, why? Visitor, they're forced to use being about everything, and also separate from others, of itself, and a million other things. They're powerless to keep from doing it, that is, from linking them together in their speech, so they don't need other people to refute them, but have an enemy within, as people say, to contradict them, and they go carrying him around talking in an undertone inside them, like the strange ventriloquist Eurycles. Theaetetus, that's a very accurate comparison. Visitor, well then, what if we admit that everything has the capacity to associate with everything else? Theaetetus, I can solve that one. Visitor, how? Theaetetus, because if change and rest belong to each other, then change would be completely at rest, and conversely, rest itself would be changing. Visitor, but Visitor, but I suppose it's ruled out by very strict necessity that change should be at rest, and that rest should change. Theaetetus, of course. Visitor, so the third option is the only one left. Theaetetus, yes. Visitor, certainly one of the following things has to be the case. Either everything is willing to blend, or nothing is, or some things are and some things are not, or and some are not. Theaetetus, of course. Visitor, and we found that the first two options were impossible. Theaetetus, yes. Visitor, so everyone who wants to give the right answer will choose the third. Theaetetus, absolutely. Visitor, and some will blend and some won't. They'll be a good deal like letters of the alphabet. Some of them fit together with each other, and some don't. Theaetetus, of course. Visitor, more than the other letters, the vowels run through all of them like a bond, linking them together, so that without a vowel, no one of the others can fit with another. Theaetetus, definitely. Visitor, so does everyone know which kinds of letters can associate with which? Or does it take an expert? Theaetetus, it takes an expert. What kind? Theaetetus, an expert in grammar. Visitor, well then, isn't it the same with high and low notes? The musician is the one with the expertise to know which ones mix and which ones don't, and the unmusical person is the one who doesn't understand that. Theaetetus, yes. Visitor, and in other cases of expertise and the lack of it, we'll find something similar. Theaetetus, of course. Visitor, well then, we've agreed that kinds mix with each other in the same way. So if someone's going to show us correctly which kinds harmonize with which, and which kinds exclude each other, doesn't he have to have some kind of knowledge? He proceeds through the discussion? And in addition, doesn't he have to know whether there are any kinds that run through all of them, and link them together to make them capable of blending? And also when there are divisions, whether certain kinds running through wholes are always the cause of the division? Theaetetus, of course, that requires knowledge, probably just about the most important kind. So, Theaetetus, what shall we label this kind of knowledge? So, Theaetetus, what shall we label this knowledge? Or, for heaven's sake, without noticing, have we stumbled on the knowledge that free people have? Maybe we found the philosopher even though we were looking for the sophist. Theaetetus, what do you mean? Visitor, aren't we going to say that it takes expertise in dialectic to divide things by kinds, and not to think that the same form is a different one, or that a different form is the same? Theaetetus, yes. Visitor, so if a person can do that, he'll be capable of adequately discriminating a single form spread out all through a lot of other things, each of which stands separate from the others. In addition, he can discriminate forms that are different from each other but are included within a single form that's outside them, or a single form that's connected as a unit throughout many wholes, or many forms that are completely separate from others. That's what it is to know how to discriminate by kinds, how things can associate and how they can't. Theaetetus, absolutely, visitor, and you'll assign this dialectical activity only to someone who has a pure and just love of wisdom. Theaetetus, you certainly couldn't assign it to anyone else. Visitor, we'll find that the philosopher will always be in a location like this if we look for him. He's hard to see clearly too, but not in the same way as a sophist. Theaetetus, why not? Visitor, the sophist runs off in the darkness of that which is not, which he's had practice dealing with, and he's hard to see because the place is so dark. Isn't that right? Theaetetus, it seems to be. Visitor, but the philosopher always uses reasoning to stay near the form, being. He isn't at all easy to see because that area is so bright, and the eyes of most people's souls can't bear to look at what's divine. Theaetetus, that seems just as right as what you just said before. Visitor, we'll think about the philosopher more clearly soon if we want to, but as far as the sophist is concerned, we obviously shouldn't give up until we've gotten a good enough look at him. Theaetetus, fine. Side note, alternatively, the two previous sentences can be translated. So if a person can do that, he'll adequately discriminate a single form spread out all through many, each of which stands separate from the others, and many forms that are different from each other but are included within a single form that's outside them, and another single form connected as a unit through many wholes, and from many forms that are marked off in separation. Visitor, we've agreed on this. Some kinds will associate with each other, and some won't. Some will to a small extent, and others will associate a great deal. Nothing prevents still others from being all-pervading, from being associated with every one of them. So next, let's pursue our account together this way. Let's not talk about every form. That way we won't be thrown off by dealing with too many of them. Instead, let's choose some of the most important ones. First, we'll ask what they're like, and next we'll ask about what their ability to associate with each other. Even if our grasp of that which is and that which is not isn't completely clear, our aim will be to avoid being totally without an account of them, so far as that's allowed by our present line of inquiry, and see whether we can get away with saying that that which is not really is that which is not. Theaetetus, that's what we have to do. Visitor, the most important kinds we've just been discussing are that which is, rest, and change. Theaetetus, yes, by far. Visitor, and we say that two of them don't blend with each other. Theaetetus, definitely not. Visitor, but that which is blends with both of them, since presumably both of them are. Theaetetus, of course. Visitor, we do have three of them. Theaetetus, yes. Visitor, so each of them is different from two of them, but is the same as itself. Theaetetus, yes. Visitor, but what in the world are the same and the different that we've been speaking of? Are they two kinds other than those three, but necessarily always blending with them? And do we have to think of them all as being five and not three? Or have what we've been calling the same and the different turned out without our realizing it to be among those three? Theaetetus, maybe. Visitor, but change and rest are certainly not different or the same? Theaetetus, why not? Visitor, whatever we call change and rest in common can't be either one of them. Theaetetus, why not? Visitor, then change would rest and rest would change. In both cases, if either change or rest comes to be either same or different, then it will force the other to change to the contrary of its own nature, since it will share in its contrary. Theaetetus, absolutely. Visitor, and both do share in the same and in the different. Theaetetus, yes. Visitor, then anyway, let's not change that change is the same or the different, nor that rest is. Theaetetus, all right. Visitor, but do we have to think of that which is and the same as one thing? Theaetetus, maybe. Visitor, but if that which is and the same don't signify distinct things, then when we say that change and rest both are, we'll be labeling both of them as the same. Theaetetus, but certainly that's impossible. Visitor, so it's impossible for the same and that which is to be one. Theaetetus, I suppose so. Visitor, shall we take the same as a fourth in addition to the other three forms? Theaetetus, of course. Visitor, well then, do we have to call the different a fifth, or should we think of it and that which is as two names for one kind? Theaetetus, maybe. Visitor, but I think you'll admit that some of those which are said by themselves, but some are always said in relation to other things. Theaetetus, of course. Visitor, but the different is always said in relation to another, isn't it? Theaetetus, yes. Visitor, but it wouldn't be if that which is and the different weren't completely distinct. If the different shared in both kinds the way that which is does, then some of the things that are different would be different without being different in relation to anything different. In fact, though, it turns out that whatever is different definitely has to be what is from something that's different. Theaetetus, that's exactly the way it is. Visitor, and we do have to call the nature of the different a fifth among the forms we're choosing. Theaetetus, yes. Visitor, and we're going to say that it pervades all of them, since each of them is different from the others, not because of its own nature, but because of sharing in the type of the different. Theaetetus, absolutely. Visitor, let's take up each of the five one by one and say this. Theaetetus, what? First, let's say that change is completely different from rest. Shall we say that? Theaetetus, yes. Visitor, so it is not rest. Theaetetus, not at all. Visitor, but it is because it shares in that which is. Theaetetus, yes. Visitor, then again, change is different from the same. Theaetetus, pretty much. Visitor, so it is not the same. Theaetetus, no. Visitor, but still, it was the same, we said, because everything has a share of that. Theaetetus, definitely. Visitor, we have to agree without any qualms that change is the same and not the same. When we say that it's the same and not the same, we aren't speaking the same way. When we say it's the same, that's because it shares in the same relation to itself. But when we say it's not the same, that's because of its association with the different. Because of its association with the different, change is separated from the same, and so becomes not it but different. So that it's right to say that it's not the same. Theaetetus, of course. Visitor, so if change itself ever somehow had a share in rest, there would be nothing strange about labeling it resting. Theaetetus, that's absolutely right, as long as we admit that some kinds will blend with each other and some won't. Visitor, that, though, we demonstrated earlier before we came to this point, and we showed that by nature it has to be so. Theaetetus, of course. Visitor, to repeat, change is different from different, just as it's other than both the same and rest. Theaetetus, it has to be. Visitor, so in a way, it is different and not different, according to what we've said. Right? Visitor, so what next? Are we going to say that change is different from the first three, but not from the fourth, in spite of the fact that we've agreed that there were five things we were going to investigate? Theaetetus, how could we do that? We can't admit that there are fewer of them than there appear to be just now. Visitor, so shall we go on fearlessly contending that change is different from that which is? Theaetetus, Yes, we should be absolutely fearless, visitor. So it's clear that change really is both something that is not, but also a thing, that is, since it partakes in that which is. Theaetetus. That's absolutely clear, visitor. So it has to be possible for that which is not to be, in the case of change, and also as applied to all kinds. That's because, as applied to all of them, the nature of the different makes each of them not be, by making it different from that which is. And we're going to be right if we say that all of them are not in this same way. And on the other hand, we're also going to be right if we call them beings, because they have a share in that which is. Theaetetus. It seems that way, visitor. So as concerning each of the forms, that which is extensive, and that which is not is indefinite in quantity. Theaetetus. That seems right. Visitor. So we have to say that that which is itself is different from the others. Theaetetus. Necessarily. Visitor. So even that which is not, in as many applications as there are of the others, since, not being them, it is one thing, namely itself, and on the other hand it is not those others, which are an indefinite number. Theaetetus. I suppose so. Visitor. So then we shouldn't even be annoyed about this conclusion, precisely because it's the nature of kinds to allow association with each other, and if somebody isn't admit that, then he needs to win us over from our earlier line of argument for it, in order to win us over from its consequences. Theaetetus. That's entirely fair. Visitor. Now let's look at this. Theaetetus. What? Visitor. It seems that when we say that which is not, we don't say something contrary to that which is, but only something different from it. Theaetetus. Why? Visitor. It's like this. When we speak of something as not large, does it seem to you that we indicate the small rather than the equal? Theaetetus. Of course not. Visitor. So we won't agree with somebody who says that negation signifies a contrary. We'll only admit this much when not and non are prefixed to names that follow them. They indicate something other than the names, or rather, other than things to which the names following the negation are applied. Theaetetus. Absolutely. Visitor. If you don't mind, though, let's think about this. Theaetetus. What? Visitor. The nature of the different appears to be chopped up, just like knowledge. Theaetetus. Why? Visitor. Knowledge is a single thing too, I suppose, but each part of it that has to do with something is marked off and has a name peculiar to itself. That's why there has said to be many expertises and many kinds of knowledge. Theaetetus. Of course. Visitor. And so the same thing happens to the parts of nature of the different too, even though it's one thing. Theaetetus. Maybe, but shall we say how? Visitor. Is there a part of the different that's placed over against the beautiful? Theaetetus. Yes. Visitor. Shall we say it's nameless, or does it have a name? Theaetetus. It has a name. What we call not beautiful is the thing that's different from nothing other than the nature of the beautiful. Visitor. Now go ahead and tell me this. Theaetetus. What? Visitor. Isn't it in the following way, that the not beautiful turns out to be namely, by being both marked off within one kind of those that are, and also set over against one of those that are? Theaetetus. Yes. Visitor. Then it seems that the not beautiful is a sort of setting of a being over against a being. Theaetetus. That's absolutely right. Visitor. Well then, according to this account, is the beautiful more a being than the not beautiful? Theaetetus. Not at all. Visitor. So we have to say that both the not large and the large are equally are. Theaetetus. Yes. Visitor. So we also have to put the not just on par with the just, and that neither is any more than the other? Theaetetus. Of course. Visitor. And we'll speak about the others in the same way too, since the nature of the different appeared as being one of those that are. And because it is, we have to posit its part as no less beings. Theaetetus. Of course. Visitor. So it seems that the setting against each other of the nature of a part, of the different and the nature of that which is not any less being, if we're allowed to say such a thing, than that which is itself. And it does not signify something contrary to that which is, but only something different from it. Theaetetus. Clearly. Visitor. So what shall we call it? Theaetetus. Obviously that which is not, which we were looking for because of the Sophist, is just exactly this. Visitor. Then does it have just as much being as any of the others, as you said it did? Should we work up the courage now to say that that which is not definitely is that something that has its own nature? Should we say that just as the large was large, the beautiful was the beautiful, the not large was not large, and the not beautiful was not beautiful, in the same way that which is not also was and is not being, and is one form among the many that are? Do we, Theaetetus, still have any doubts about that? Theaetetus, no. Visitor, you know our disbelief in Parmenides has gone even farther than his prohibition. Theaetetus, how? Visitor, we've pushed our investigation ahead and shown him something even beyond what he prohibited us from even thinking about. Theaetetus, in what way? Visitor, because he says, remember, never shall it force itself on us that that which is not may be. Keep your thought far away from this path of searching. Theaetetus, that's what he says. Visitor, but we've not only shown that those which are not are. We've also caused what turns out to be the form of that which is not to appear. Since we showed that the nature of the different is chopped up among all beings in relation to each other, we dared to say that that which is not really is just this, namely, each part of the nature of the different that's set over against that which is, Theaetetus, and what we've said seems to me completely and totally true. Visitor, nobody can say that this is that which is not, which we've made to appear, and now dare to say is the contrary of that which is. We've said goodbye long ago to any contrary of that which is, and to whether it is or not, and also to whether or not an account can be given of it. With regard to that which is not, which we've said is, let someone refute us and persuade us that we've made a mistake, or else, so long as he can't do that, he should say just what we say. He has to say that the kinds blend with each other, that that which is and the different pervade all of them and each other, that the different shares in that which is, and so, because of that sharing, is. But he won't say that it is that which it shares in, but that it is different from it, and necessarily, because it is different from that which is it clearly can be what is not. On the other hand, that which is has a share in the different. Though being different from all of the others, it is not each of them, and it is not all of the others except itself. So that which is indisputably is not millions of things, and all of the others together, and also each of them are in many ways, and also are not in many ways. Theaetetus, true. Visitor, and if anyone doesn't believe these contrarieties, he has to think about them himself and say something better than what we've said. But if he thinks he's recognized a problem in it and enjoys dragging the argument back and forth, then he's been carried away by something that's not worth much of anyone's attention, to go by what we've just been saying anyway. A thing like that isn't clever or hard to discover, but the other thing is both difficult and at the same time beautiful. Theaetetus, what other thing? Visitor, the thing we said earlier, that is, we should leave pointless things like this alone. Instead, we should be able to follow what a person says and scrutinize it step by step. When he says that what's different is the same in a certain way, or that what's the same is different in a certain way, we should understand just what way he means, and the precise respect in which he's saying that the thing is the same or different. But when someone makes that which is the same appear different in just any old way, or vice versa, or when he makes what's large appear small, or something that's similar appear dissimilar, well, if someone enjoys constantly trotting out contraries like that in discussion, that's not true refutation. It's only the obvious newborn brainchild of someone who just came into contact with those which are. Theaetetus, definitely. Visitor, in fact, my friend, it's inept to try to separate everything from everything else. It's the sign of a completely unmusical and unphilosophical person. Theaetetus, why? Visitor, to dissociate each thing from everything else is to destroy totally everything there is to say. The weaving together of forms is what makes speech possible for us. Theaetetus, that's true. Visitor, think about what a good moment we picked to fight it out against the people like that, and to force them further to let one thing blend with another. Theaetetus, why a good moment? Visitor, for a speech is being one kind among those that are. If we were deprived of that, we'd be deprived of philosophy, to mention the most important thing. Besides, now we have to agree about what speech is, but we'd be able to say nothing if speech were taken away from us. and weren't anything at all. And it would be taken away if we admitted that there is no blending of anything with anything else. Theaetetus. This last thing is right anyway, but I don't understand why we have to agree about speech. Visitor. Well, perhaps you'll understand if you follow me this way. Theaetetus. Where? Visitor. That which is not appeared to us to be one kind among others, but scattered over all those which are. Theaetetus. Yes. Visitor. So next we have to think about whether it blends with belief and speech. Theaetetus. Why? Visitor. If it doesn't blend with them, then everything has to be true. But if it does, then there will be false belief and false speech, since falsity in thinking and speaking amount to believing and saying those that are not. Theaetetus. Yes. Visitor. And if there's falsity, then there's deception. Theaetetus. Of course. Visitor. And if there's deception, then necessarily the world will be full of copies, likenesses, and appearances. Theaetetus. Of course. Visitor. We said that the Sophist had escaped into this region, but that he denied that there has come to be or is such a thing as falsity. For he denied that anyone either thinks or says that which is not, on the ground that that which is not never in any way has a share in being. Theaetetus. That's what he said. Visitor. But now it apparently does share in that which is, so he probably wouldn't still put up a fight about that. Perhaps, though, he might say that some forms share in that which is not, and some don't, and that speech and belief are ones that don't. So he might contend again that copy-making and appearance-making, in which we said he was contained, totally are not. His ground would be that belief and speech don't associate with that which is not, and that without this speech, falsity totally is not. That's why we have to search around for speech, belief, and appearance, and first discover what they are, so that when they appear, we see their association with that which is not clearly. And when we've seen that clearly, we can show that falsity is, and when we've shown that we can tie the Sophist up in it, if we can keep hold of him, or else we'll let him go, and look for him in another kind. Theaetetus. What you said at the start seems absolutely true. The Sophist is a hard kind to hunt down. He seems to have a whole supply of roadblocks, and whenever he throws one down in our way, we have to fight through it before we can get to him. But now, when we've barely gotten through the one about how that which is not, he's thrown another one down, and we have to show that falsity is present in both speech and belief. And next, it seems there will be another and another after that. A limit, it seems, never appears. Visitor. Even if you can only make a little progress, Theaetetus, you should cheer up. If you give up in this situation, what will you do some other time, when you don't get anywhere or even are pushed back? A person like that would hardly capture a city, as the saying goes. But since we've done what you just said, my friend, the largest wall may already have been captured, and the rest of them may be lower and easier. Theaetetus. Fine. Visitor. Then let's take up speech and belief, as we said just now. That way we can calculate whether that which is not comes into contact with them, or whether they're both totally true and neither one is ever false. Theaetetus. All right. Visitor. Come on then, let's think about names again, the same way as we spoke about forms and letters of the alphabet. What we're looking for seems to lie in that direction. Theaetetus. What kind of question about them do we have to answer? Visitor. Whether they all fit with each other or none of them do, or some of them will and some of them won't. Theaetetus. Anyway, it's clear that some will and some won't. Visitor. Maybe you mean something like this. Names that indicate something when you say them one after another fit together, and names that don't signify anything when you put them in a row don't fit. Theaetetus. What do you mean? Visitor. The same thing I thought you were assuming when you agreed with me just now. Since there are two ways to use your voice to indicate something about being. Theaetetus. What are they called? What are they? Visitor. One kind is called names, and the other is called verbs. Theaetetus. Tell me what each of them is. Visitor. A verb is the sort of indication that's applied to an action. Theaetetus. Yes. Visitor. And a name is the kind of spoken sign that's applied to things that performs the actions. Theaetetus. Definitely. Visitor. So no speech is formed just from names spoken in a row, and also not from verbs that are spoken without names. Theaetetus. I didn't understand that. Visitor. Clearly you were focusing on something else when you agreed with me just now. What I meant was simply this. Things don't form speech if they're said in a row like this. Theaetetus. Like what? Visitor. For example, walks, runs, sleeps, and other verbs that signify actions. Even if somebody said all of them, one after another, that wouldn't be speech. Theaetetus, of course not. Visitor, again, if somebody said lion, stag, horse, and whatever names there are of things that perform actions, the series wouldn't make up speech. The sounds he uttered in the first or second way wouldn't indicate either an action or an inaction or the being of something that is or of something that is not. Not until he mixes verbs with nouns. But when he did that, they'd fit together in speech. The simplest and smallest kind of speech, I suppose, would arise from that first weaving of name and verb together. Theaetetus, what do you mean? Visitor, when someone says man learns, would you say that's the shortest and simplest kind of speech? Theaetetus, yes. Visitor, since he gives an indication about what is, or comes to be, or has come to be, or is going to be, and he doesn't just name, but accomplishes something by weaving verbs with names, that's why he said he speaks and doesn't just name. In fact, this weaving is what we use the word speech for. Theaetetus, right. Visitor, so some things fit together and some don't. Likewise, some vocal signs don't fit together, but the ones that do produce speech. Theaetetus, absolutely. Visitor, but there's still this small point. Theaetetus, what? Visitor, whenever there's speech, it has to be about something. It's impossible for it to be about something. Theaetetus, yes. Visitor, and speech also has to have some particular quality. Theaetetus, of course. Visitor. Visitor. Now let's turn our attention to ourselves. Theaetetus. All right. Visitor. I'll produce some speech by putting a thing together with an action by means of a name and a verb. You have to tell me what it's about. Theaetetus. I'll do it as well as I can. Visitor. Theaetetus sits. That's not a long piece of speech, is it? Theaetetus, no, not long. Visitor, your job is to tell what it's about, what it's of. Theaetetus, clearly it's about me. Of me. Visitor, then what about this one? Theaetetus, what one? Visitor, Theaetetus, to whom I'm now talking, flies. Theaetetus, no one would ever deny that it's of me and about me. Visitor, we also say that each piece of speech has to have some particular quality. Theaetetus, yes. Visitor, what quality should we say each one of these has? Theaetetus, the second one is false, I suppose, and the other one is true. Visitor, and the true one says those that are, as they are, about you. Theaetetus, of course. Visitor, and the false one says things different from those that are. Theaetetus, yes. Visitor, so it says those that are not, but that they are. Theaetetus, I suppose so. Visitor, but they're different things that are from the things that are about you, since we said that concerning each thing many beings are and many are not. Theaetetus, absolutely. Visitor, in the first place, the second piece of speech I said about you must be the one of the shortest there is, according to our definition of speech. Theaetetus, we agreed to that just now, anyway. Visitor, and we agreed that it's of something. Theaetetus, yes. Visitor, and if it is not of you, it isn't of anything else. Theaetetus, of course not. Visitor, and if it were not of anything, it would not be speech at all, since we showed that it was impossible for speech that is to be speech that is of nothing. Theaetetus, absolutely right. Visitor, but if someone says things about you, but says different things as the same or not beings as beings, then it definitely seems that false speech really and truly arises from that kind of putting together of verbs and names. Theaetetus, yes, very true. Visitor, well then, isn't it clear by now that both true and false thought and belief and appearance can occur in our souls? Theaetetus, how? Visitor, the best way for you to know how is for you to first grasp what they are and how they're different from each other. Theaetetus, then just tell me. Visitor, aren't thought and speech the same, except that what we call thought is speech that occurs without the voice, inside the soul in conversation with itself? Side note, this sentence is ambiguous. First, the Greek here uses an idiom which could mean either says those that are as they are, or says those that are that they are. Secondly, the additional explanatory phrase about you could be taken with says, or with are, or with both. Theaetetus, of course. Visitor, and the stream of sound from the soul that goes through the mouth is called speech? Theaetetus, right. Visitor, and then again we know that speech contains Theaetetus, what? Visitor, an affirmation and denial. Theaetetus, yes. Visitor, so when affirmation or denial occurs as silent thought inside the soul, wouldn't you call that belief? Theaetetus, of course. Visitor, and what if that doesn't happen on its own, but arises for someone through perception? When that happens, what else could one call it correctly besides appearance? Theaetetus. Yes. Visitor. So since there is true and false speech, and of the processes just mentioned, thinking appeared to be the soul's conversation with itself, belief the conclusion of thinking, and what we call appearing the blending of perception and belief, it follows that since these are all the same kind of thing as speech, some of them must sometimes be false. Theaetetus. Of course. Visitor. So you realize we found false belief in speech sooner than we expected to just now. Then we were afraid that to look for it would be to attack a completely hopeless project. Theaetetus. Yes. Visitor. So let's not be discouraged about what's still left. Since these other things have come to light, let's remember the divisions by types that we made earlier. Theaetetus. Which ones? Visitor. We divided copy making into two types, likeness making and appearance making. Theaetetus. Yes. Visitor. And we said we were confused about which one to put the sophist in. Theaetetus. Yes. Visitor. And in our confusion about that, we plunged into an even greater bewilderment when an account emerged that disagreed with everyone. By denying that there are likenesses or copies of appearance or appearances at all, on the ground that there isn't ever any falsity in any way anywhere. Theaetetus. That's right. Visitor. But now, since false speech and false belief both appear to be, it's possible for imitations of those that are to be, and for expertise in deception to arise from that state of affairs. Theaetetus. Yes. Visitor. And we agreed before that the sophist does fall under one of the two types we just mentioned. Theaetetus. Yes. Visitor. Then let's try again to take the kind we've posited and cut it in two. Let's go ahead and always follow the right-hand part of what we've cut and hold on to things that the sophist is associated with until we stop away everything that he has in common with other things. Then when we've left his own peculiar nature, let's display it, especially to ourselves, but also to people to whom this sort of procedure is naturally congenial. Theaetetus. All right. Visitor. Didn't we begin by dividing expertise into productive and acquisitive? Theaetetus. Yes. Visitor. And under the acquisitive part, the sophist appeared in hunting, combat, wholesaling, and types of that sort? Theaetetus. Of course. Visitor. But now, since he's included among experts in imitation, first we obviously have to divide productive expertise in two. We say imitation is a sort of production, but of copies and not of things themselves. Is that right? Theaetetus. Absolutely. Visitor. First of all, production has two parts. Theaetetus. What are they? Visitor. Divine and human. Theaetetus. I don't understand yet. Visitor. If you remember how we started, we said production was any capacity that causes things to come to be that previously were not. Theaetetus. I remember. Visitor. Take animals and everything mortal, including plants and everything on the earth that grows from seeds and roots, and also lifeless bodies made up inside the earth, whether fusible or not. Are we going to say that anything besides the craftsmanship of a god makes them come to be after previously not being? Or shall we rely on the saying that and the widespread belief that Theaetetus, that what? Visitor. Are we going to say that nature produces them by some spontaneous cause that generates them without any thought, or by a cause that works by reason and divine knowledge derived from a god? Theaetetus. I often shift back and forth on that from one view to the other, maybe because of my age. When I'm focusing on you now, and supposing that you think they come to be by the agency of a god, that's what I think too. Visitor. Fine, Theaetetus. If we thought you were the kind of person who might believe something different in the future, we'd try to use some cogent, persuasive argument to make you agree. But since I know what your nature is, and I know too that even without arguments from us, it will tend in the direction that it's pulled toward now, I'll let the issue go. It would take too much time. I'll assume divine expertise produces the things that come about by so-called nature, and that human expertise produces the things that humans compound those things into. According to this account, there are two kinds of production, human and divine. Theaetetus. Right. Visitor. Since there are two of them, cut each of them into again. Theaetetus. How? Visitor. It's as if you had already cut production all the way along its width, and now you'll cut it along its length. Theaetetus. All right. Visitor. That way there are four parts of it altogether, two human ones related to us and two divine ones related to the gods. Theaetetus. Yes. Visitor, then if we take the division we made the first way, one part of each of those parts is the production of originals. Just about the best thing to call the two parts that are left might be copy making. That way production is divided into again. Theaetetus, tell me again how each of them is divided. Visitor, we know that we human beings and the other living things, and also fire, water, and things like that, which natural things come from, are each generated and produced by a god. Is that right? Theaetetus, yes. Visitor, and there are copies of each of these things as opposed to the things themselves that also come about by divine workmanship? Theaetetus, what kinds of things? Visitor, things in dreams, and appearances that arise by themselves during the day. Their shadows when darkness appears in firelight, and their reflections when a thing's own light and the light of something else come together around bright, smooth surfaces and produce an appearance that looks the reverse of the way the thing looks from straight ahead. Theaetetus, yes, those are two products of divine production, the things themselves and the copies corresponding to each one. Visitor, and what about human expertise? We say house building makes a house itself and drawing makes a different one, like a human dream made for people who are awake. Theaetetus, of course. Visitor, and just the same way in other cases too. There are pairs of products of human production, that is, the thing itself we say, and the copy. Theaetetus, now I understand better, and I take it that there are two kinds of double production, divine and human in each division. One kind produces things themselves, and the other kind produces things similar to them. Visitor, let's recall that one part of copy making is likeness making. The other kind was going to be appearance making, if falsity appeared to be truly falsity, and by nature one of those that are. Theaetetus, yes it was. Visitor, but falsity did turn out that way. So are we going to count likeness making and appearance making as indisputably two forms? Theaetetus, yes. Visitor, then let's divide appearance making in two again. Theaetetus, ow. Visitor, into one sort that's done with tools and one that uses one's own self as the tool of the person making the appearance. Theaetetus, what do you mean? Visitor, when somebody uses his own body or voice to make something similar to your body or voice, I think the best thing to call this part of appearance making is imitating. Theaetetus, yes. Visitor, let's set this part off by calling it imitation, and let's be lazy and let the other part go. We'll leave it to someone else to bring it together into a unit and give it a suitable name. Theaetetus, all right, let's take the one and let the other go. Visitor, but the right thing, Theaetetus, is still to take imitation to have two parts. Think about why. Theaetetus, tell me. Visitor, some imitators know what they're imitating and some don't. And what division is more important than the one between ignorance and knowledge? Theaetetus, none. Visitor, wasn't the imitation that we just mentioned the kind that's associated with knowledge? Someone who knew you and your character might imitate you, mightn't he? Theaetetus, of course. Visitor, what about the character of justice and all of virtue taken together? Don't many people who are ignorant of it, but have some beliefs about it, try hard to cause what they believe it is to appear to be present in them? And don't they imitate it in their words and actions as much as they can? Theaetetus, very many people do that. Visitor, and are they all unsuccessful at seeming to be just without being just at all? Or is the opposite true? Theaetetus, yes, the opposite. Visitor, I think we have to say that this person who doesn't know is a very different imitator. Visitor, I think we have to say that this person who doesn't know is a very different imitator from the previous one who does. Theaetetus, yes. Visitor, where would you get a suitable name for each of them? Isn't it obviously hard to, just because the people who came before us were thoughtless and lazy about dividing things into types, and so they never even tried to divide them? That's why we necessarily lack a good supply of names? Still, even though it sounds daring, let's distinguish them by calling imitation accompanied by belief mimicry, and imitation accompanied by knowledge informed mimicry. Theaetetus, all right. Visitor, then we need to use the former term, since the sophist isn't one of the people who know, but is one of the people who imitate. Theaetetus, he certainly is. Visitor, let's examine the belief mimic the way people examine iron, to see whether it's sound or has a crack in it. Theaetetus, all right. Visitor, well, it has a big one. One sort of belief mimic is foolish and thinks he knows the things he only has beliefs about. The other sort has been around a lot of discussions, and so by temperament he's suspicious and fearful that he doesn't know the things that he pretends in front of others to know. Theaetetus, there definitely are both types that you've mentioned. Visitor, shall we take one of these to be a sort of sincere imitator, and the other to be an insincere one? Theaetetus, that seems right. Visitor, and are there one or two kinds of insincere ones? Theaetetus, you look and see. Visitor, I'm looking and there clearly appear to be two. I see that one sort can maintain his insincerity in long speeches to a crowd, and the other uses short speeches in private conversation to force the person talking with him to contradict himself. Theaetetus, you're absolutely right. Visitor, how shall we show up the long-winded sort as a statesman or as a demagogue? Theaetetus, a demagogue. Visitor, and what shall we call the other one? Wise or a sophist? Theaetetus, we can't call him wise, since we took him not to know anything, but since he imitates the wise man, he'll obviously have a name derived from the wise man's name. And now at last I see that we have to call him the person who is really and truly a sophist. Visitor, shall we weave his name together from start to finish and tie it up the way we did before? Theaetetus, of course. Visitor, imitation of the contrary speech-producing, insincere, and unknowing sort, of the appearance-making, kind of copy-making, the word-juggling part of production, that's marked off as human and not divine. Anyone who says the sophist is of this blood and family will be saying, it seems, the complete truth. Theaetetus, absolutely. All right, that was a sophist. It's a way for us to tell what is true speech, what is insincere speech, those that are just mimicking, I guess, what the truth is. So yeah, thanks for joining me. Tune in next time. I'm going to read some more Plato. So see you later.